And Chairman Schiff joins us now. Chairman, thanks for taking the time. In light of what has been reported about a possible decision on Roe v. Wade, you have called for the court to be expanded. How so?
Well, I think the court is now the most unrepresentative body in the United States. It is a socially conservative court that has moved in a partisan direction to enact a partisan agenda. And it's the result of Mitch McConnell withholding a justice when Barack Obama was president, and then forcing through a justice in the waning days before the election with President Trump. As a result, the court is now stacked in the socially conservative way, and I think it needs to be unstacked.
How do you unstack it? There are 9 justices historically on the court. How many do you believe should be on the court?
Well, I think that the tilt that Mitch McConnell accomplished by essentially gaming our constitutional system ought to be neutralized. So I think that though that 2-justice swing that was accomplished by hook or by crook is causing the court to move even more radically in a direction that Americans don't want and will put women's reproductive health at risk.
But I'm just curious about what does it mean to expand the court? You've called for expanding it. Is it a certain number you have in mind? Is it a Supreme Court of 11, 13, 15, more than that?
Well,
circulating justices?
I think the important point is to neutralize the 2 justices that Mitch McConnell gamed our constitutional system by stacking the court with. That to me would be the objective. Others may have a different view. But this problem goes well beyond Roe versus Wade. This is now a partisan court with a social agenda, unreflective of the country, that will put women's health at risk. And this is going to go beyond Roe versus Wade. It puts gay marriage at risk. It puts a whole host of decisions precedent at risk, because this court has shown precedent is meaningless in the face of their socially motivated ideology.
Does the Supreme Court still have integrity as an institution?
I think, sadly, most Americans now view the court, as they should in the wake of this draft opinion, as no longer a conservative legal court, but merely a partisan one. The court has become, sadly, a partisan institution like every other. That was not what the court was intended to be, but it is the result, I think, of these decisions by McConnell and Trump. And the result is that the court is now in a position to force on America a policy regarding abortion that America does not agree with, that puts women's health at risk, and I think is disastrous for the country.
Will House Democrats who have power in your respective branch of government do anything between now and November's elections on the Supreme Court front?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that we will take up legislation to protect Roe versus Wade. I think that's the first order of business. And I have to hope that some of these senators that bought these assurances from these Supreme Court nominees when they were before the Senate under oath that they would respect precedent, having seen those promises betrayed, would support legislation now to codify Roe and do what's necessary to overcome the filibuster to do it.
Is that legislation likely dead in the Senate? You raise so much money for not only House Democrats, but Senate Democrats. You surely have a sense of the dynamics in that chamber as well.
I don't know what an earthquake this draft opinion will be. I would hope that it will motivate senators to understand that this arcane Senate rule called the filibuster now gets in the way not just of voting rights, as serious as that is, but also puts women's health at risk all over the country, millions of women. And no arcane Senate rule ought to do that. Mitch McConnell has shown every willingness to dispense with the filibuster when it suits his political purposes. Why on earth should senators now stand in favor of this rule when the failure to overturn it will mean women's health will be put at risk?
How does this possible decision looming ahead affect the midterm elections and Democratic voters?
Well, the most important fact is that it's going to put women's health at risk. In terms of it being a motivating factor for women to get out and vote, and a lot of men as well, I think it will be hugely motivating. This has never been tested before. I think in the past, people have thought that surely the court won't overturn Roe. Surely these justices who promised to uphold precedent will do so. Well, now we see this is exactly the design of social conservatives for decades. They're on the precipice of achieving it, but it may have a catalytic effect on turnout and result in a different kind of a Senate, a stronger majority in the House, and a willingness to protect both a women's right to choose, voting rights, and make progress in so many other issues as well.
We just had a primary in Ohio. Both parties had primary elections for House and Senate, governor as well. Any lessons from Ohio this week for you?
Well, I think the lesson is that Donald Trump still holds great sway within the Republican Party, that candidates and incumbents are willing to tie themselves up in knots like Vance did, going from vigorous Trump critic to vigorous Trump supporter in a craven effort to achieve power. That dynamic has not changed. You see it in Kevin McCarthy's lies and his lies about lies, and you see it now in Vance's advancement into the general election.
The recently released audio by the New York Times from the book This Will Not Pass by Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns details how McCarthy was discussing options in the wake of January 6th. I'm sure you've heard some of that audio, at least. Were you aware of McCarthy thinking through his options at the time, including discussion of the 25th Amendment and how that could play out?
I wasn't aware of these recordings or the substance of the recordings, but I have to say it doesn't surprise me. Kevin McCarthy made public statements attributing some of the blame for that attack on the Capitol to Donald Trump. And McCarthy has vacillated this way, that way, whatever way he needs to try to attain power. But I think it's such a sad state of affairs when, if you're willing to lie as McCarthy is, you can achieve leadership in the Republican Party. But if you're willing to tell the truth, as Liz Cheney is, there's no place for you. This is the state of Donald Trump's GOP. But Kevin McCarthy's lies and his lies about lies don't surprise me. I think anyone that's worked with Kevin McCarthy knows exactly who and what he is.
You're not only chairman of the Intelligence Committee, but you're also a member of the January 6th committee. Is the foreign interference question part of that investigation in any way, something you're focusing on?
Yes, we're certainly looking at all of the influences that led to the tragedy on January 6th, what role domestic parties play, what role foreign actors played in potentially amplifying the big lie or sowing and fomenting division in the United States or more. So that is certainly one of the issues that we're examining.
Did Russia in any way play a role on January 6th?
I don't want to comment yet in what we're finding in terms of foreign actors, but certainly we'll be fleshing out what we see to whatever degree we see it. But I think the primary actors here, sadly, were the former president, his acolytes in Congress, enablers around the country filing bogus litigation. But the foreign powers, particularly Russia, certainly look to exploit any internal divisions in the United States. They look to diminish American confidence in their own form of government, and we'll be laying out what role foreign powers played or didn't play in our report.
What is your role going to be in the public hearings?
Well, I'll certainly be participating in the public hearings, and we will be dividing up the responsibilities. It's being, I think, organized in a very methodical fashion. We want to tell the whole story, not just of the date of January 6th, but all of the multiple lines of effort that went into overturning the election and what we need to do to protect the country going forward.
Are you satisfied as your investigation moves forward in the House with the Department of Justice's own investigation and grand jury?
I think the Department of Justice is, vigorous in its investigation of the break into the Capitol, of the violence that was done at the Capitol. My concern is that I don't see evidence of the Justice Department investigating other lines of effort to overturn the election in which the president was personally implicated. Georgia, for example, where the president tried to get the Secretary of State in that state to find 11,780 votes that don't exist in a recorded conversation. I think if others were on the phone trying to do that, they would be under investigation. But I see no sign that the Justice Department is doing it, even though the Fulton County DA is looking into the matter.
Why do you think that is, that they're not probing the political and legal side of this, at least from what we can tell publicly?
Well, I mean, their obligation is to investigate any credible allegations of crime. And, you know, as Judge Carter in California indicated in his forceful opinion, there is evidence that the former president was engaged in multiple criminal acts. Why isn't justice looking into that? Why is there no sign of that anyway? I have to think there's a great reluctance to embroil the department in controversy or give the appearance of doing an investigation that has a political tone to it or could be characterized that way. But the reality is, if the principle of no one being above the law is to be upheld, it means no one can be above the law, and that includes the former president. Is
Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, too hands-off when it comes to former President Trump and his allies?
You know, I don't know the inside management of the department. I suspect, just from what I've seen of the Attorney General, that he's not hands-off. That what the department is doing or not doing is reflecting his judgment. And I think he's a person of great integrity. But I don't think we can have in a situation where for 4 years the department took the position you can't indict a sitting president and then take the position that as a practical prudential matter, you also can't investigate one because it would be too controversial or too political seeming. That would effectively give a president of the United States license to commit crime. And that's an idea that I think would have been anathema to the founders.
You believe a former president should be able to be indicted if it reaches that point in an investigation, that there's a belief that that should happen. Indicting former President Trump, in your view, should be on the table?
I think that anyone who's committed crimes should be the subject of indictment. It may be that once you conclude the investigation, you decide that there are certain mitigating circumstances or failures of proof, but I don't think you can ignore the need to investigate simply because it would be controversial. I think you follow the evidence where it leads, and if the evidence leads to proof beyond a reasonable doubt of crime by a former president, then that president should be indicted.
Chairman, you just returned from Ukraine. You went there to visit Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, with Speaker Pelosi. What's next for the House of Representatives in terms of support for that government?
Well, we'll be taking up this $33 billion aid package, and our meeting with Zelensky helped give content to what should be the priority for the use of that appropriation. Personally, I think that helping the Ukrainians in this new phase of the war with longer range artillery, with multiple rocket launch systems, has to be a top priority. We've moved from a situation where Russian forces were widely dispersed and Ukrainian forces could pick them off in ambushes to the use of a lot of long-range artillery, a fight at a distance. And we need to make sure that Ukraine has the wherewithal to defend itself in that fight. I also want to see the port of Odessa open, which means helping Ukrainians with the anti-ship munitions it needs. This is not only, I think, vital to Ukraine's war effort, but also to getting food out of the port of Odessa to the rest of the world. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe and beyond, and Russia blockading that port will not only cause further humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, but also for parts of Africa and elsewhere.
Did anything surprise you, Chairman, when you were on the ground in Ukraine, something that maybe grabbed your attention that you hadn't been paying attention to through following this via intelligence reports and headlines?
Well, a couple of things really stand out to me, and that is that Ukrainians, even far from the Eastern Front, deal with the terror of cruise missiles from Russia hitting all parts of the country. It's what Ukrainians are now calling a missile terrorism. And in Kiev, you could see people out walking in the park and life looked normal on the one hand. You could see other parts of the city closed down. And yet all of that city, and indeed cities throughout Ukraine, have to worry about looking up into the sky, seeing a flash, and that being the end of their life. But I also was struck by the remarkable calm of President Zelensky among the chaos of war. He was focused on the weapons that he needs, the military situation, the humanitarian relief necessary, He showed, I think, a Churchillian both calm and resolve, and was just extraordinarily impressive. As we approach May 9th, a date in which Russia celebrates its victory in World War II, I'm deeply concerned that they will use that date to dramatically escalate, either by intensifying the fight between now and then, by declaring part of Eastern Ukraine to be now incorporated into Russia, or in some other way escalating. Putin has very little to show, and a lot of dead bodies coming back to Russia. And there's a real risk that in advance of May 9th, he escalates dramatically.
Final question, Chairman Schiff. Should Speaker Pelosi decide to retire in the coming years, are you personally interested in running for leadership, the leader position, whether it's Speaker or leader of the House Democratic Conference?
Well, right now I've got my plate more than full with the Intelligence Committee work on Ukraine and the January 6th committee work as well. But I'd like to continue in a leadership role, either on the committee or in the body at large. But I think the immediate focus is to make sure that we hold on to the House. After all, one of those lines of effort on January 6th to interfere with the passing of power after the election was led by McCarthy. And should he ever become Speaker, he will overturn the next presidential election if Donald Trump loses again. So I think all of our focus has to be on winning the midterms, and we can worry about leadership when the time comes.
Chairman Schiff, thank you.
Thank you.